They said we were nothing but a rabble, farmers with hay still on our boots, craftsmen with calloused hands more suited to wood than war. They saw our tattered cloaks and thought we would break. But on that cool September morning in 1297, standing on the northern bank of the River Forth, we were more than men. We were a nation waiting to awaken. I remember the mist curling over the water, veiling the wooden bridge like a shroud. Across it, the pride of England assembled armored knights, glinting in the dim light, banners snapping in the breeze, their war horses pawing at the earth like beasts eager for blood. They believed the day would be theirs. But behind the rise at Abbey Craig, we waited William Wallace, Andrew Moray, and every soul who had bled under the weight of English rule. Our breath was still, our hearts steady. The world may have called us rebels, outlaws, nobodies, but that day we stood as Scotland, and what they thought was a simple crossing would become their grave. It began long before the bridge, before the clash of steel and the roar of war horns. It began in 1296, when Edward Longshanks, the so-called Hammer of the Scots, crushed our kingdom beneath his iron will. He didn't just conquer our land, he stole our soul. I remember the rage I felt when news spread that the Stone of Destiny had been taken from Scone and carted off to Westminster, a sacred symbol of our kings, ripped from our soil and placed beneath a foreign throne. Castles fell, nobles bent the knee, and with the stroke of a quill, the ragman roll bound our lords in oaths to a king they did not love. But loyalty inked under fear is no loyalty at all. Edward thought he had won. He thought parchment meant peace, but he never understood us. Not truly. You can seize a castle, yes, but how do you conquer a mother's love for her land? How do you cage the memory of freedom in a shepherd's song? He taxed us, watched us, mocked us, and in the shadow of his cruelty, resistance began to breathe again. Quiet at first, like smoke in the trees. But smoke can become fire. It didn't come as a roar, but as scattered sparks. In the north, Andrew Moray slipped the grip of English chains and raised the banner of defiance among the Highland mist. A noble by blood, but driven by something deeper: grit, vengeance, purpose. He laid siege to English-held castles, one stone at a time, starving them of food and hope. In the south, I walked a different path. I was no lord, no knight, just a man with too many ghosts and nothing left to lose. In May 1297, I struck back. The sheriff of Lanark, William Heselrig, fell beneath my blade in the open street. Some say it was vengeance for my wife. Others say it was the English boot finally pressing too hard. Truth is, it didn't matter. That moment wasn't just mine, it belonged to every Scot who had swallowed silence. Word spread like wildfire. We became shadows in the forests, thorns in the heel of the crown. Tacksmen vanished on lonely roads. Supply wagons burned before reaching their garrisons. We weren't just rebelling, we were remembering who we were. They called me outlaw, murderer, brigand. Maybe they were right, but in the eyes of my people, I was something else, proof that defiance was still alive. My men were not soldiers. They were fathers, brothers, thieves, and dreamers. We had no armor, only courage. We struck in the night and vanished into the hills. Every raid, every ambush was a message. You do not own us. The English feared the shadows because we became them. I learned to read the land the way a hawk reads the wind. The rivers told me when to strike. The forests hid my wounded. The people fed us when hunger gnawed at our bellies. We fought not to win glory, but to make the enemy bleed as we had bled. Each victory, no matter how small, drew more to our cause. And somewhere between fire and frost, I stopped being one man. I became the whisper that stirred the camps, the spark that burned the silence. War was coming, and for the first time, we would choose where to fight. While I turned the South into a battlefield of shadows, Andrew Moray carved his rebellion into the Highlands. He didn't shout or burn like I did, he built. Quietly, methodically, he gathered clans and sealed alliances. His banners flew above besieged castles. His men cut off English supply lines like vines strangling a tree. Moray was everything I was not, calculated where I was reckless, noble, born where I was not, but with a mind as sharp as any blade. We did not yet fight side by side, but I watched his movements like stars in a night sky. guiding something greater than us both. He proved this wasn't just a band of outlaws throwing stones at giants, this was a rising tide. His victories gave our cause weight, and more importantly, gave it roots. Across Scotland, from glens to kirkyards, people began to believe, not just in me, not just in Moray, but in Scotland herself. We were no longer two uprisings, we were two flames moving toward each other. That summer, the land itself seemed to rise with us. The valleys whispered rebellion, and the hills echoed with the sound of men leaving hearth and home, choosing freedom over fear. Blacksmiths laid down their hammers to pick up swords. Farmhands became pikemen overnight. Even the church, once cautious, began to shift. Some priests opened their doors to the wounded. Others slipped coin into rebel hands, their sermons laced with quiet defiance. And then, in a moment that felt like fate tightening its thread, Andrew Moray and I met, two paths converging at last. North and south, noble and commoner, strategy and fire, united not by ambition, but by purpose. Our numbers were not grand, perhaps 6, maybe 8,000 in all. But behind every spear stood a soul ready to die rather than kneel. We were not a professional army. We were something older, something fiercer. We were the breath of a country trying to remember its name. And at Stirling, we chose to make our stand not with overwhelming strength, but with brilliant intent. Stirling was more than a town, it was a key. Perched on a crag, its castle looming like a sentinel over the River Forth. It controlled the passage between the lowlands and the wild north. But it wasn't the walls we looked at. It was the bridge, narrow, wooden, barely wide enough for two riders to pass abreast. To most, it was just an inconvenience. To us, it was salvation. We saw not a crossing but a funnel, a bottleneck, a blade's edge on which an army could bleed. Moray and I studied every inch of the terrain, the marshes, the banks, the rising ground near Abbey Craig where we could hide. We didn't have their numbers, nor their horses, nor their steel. But we had patience, and we had the land. We shaped our plan around the bridge like a sculptor around stone. Let them come. Let them believe we were cornered. Let them cross, slowly, arrogantly. And when half their strength stood stranded on our side, hemmed in by mud and water, we would strike. Not with equal force, with timing, with fury, with everything we had left. They came like thunder on the horizon. John de Warenne, Earl of Surrey, leading a force that could darken the hills. 10,000 strong, they said, knights clad in shining mail, infantry drawn from England's shires, Welsh archers with eyes like hawks, and with them, that butcher Cressingham, his purse fat with stolen Scottish coin, his mouth spitting scorn for men like us. They believed we would flee at the sight of them, that we'd melt into the hills like ghosts. But we didn't. We waited. I remember watching them from our hidden ridge, their banners unfurling like a boast. Their camp reeked of overconfidence. The knights laughed, boasting of how they'd trample us underhoof, break our lines in moments. Some even wagered how many Scots they'd kill before midday. But they didn't know what we knew. They didn't see the trap beneath their feet. They saw an enemy who looked untrained, outnumbered, outgunned. And they mistook that for weakness. But that was the first step in their fall. Pride always blinds the mighty, especially when they think they've already won. Dawn broke over the River Forth with a mist that clung low to the water, quiet as breath. We crouched behind the ridge at Abbey Craig, my men stiff with cold, eyes locked on the narrow bridge. The English stirred on the far bank, armor clinking, horses snorting, banners rising like the Sunday. But we did not move. Not yet. Timing would be everything. One premature charge and we'd be crushed. Our command was clear. Wait. Let them come to us, blind and confident. Let their own momentum carry them into our jaws. Below, the English camp argued. Some of Surrey's men, sensing danger, urged caution, suggesting the army march upriver to a safer ford. But Cressingham sneered, called delay cowardice, and demanded they take the bridge. And so, they obeyed. One by one, knights and footmen began to cross, two abreast, slow, vulnerable, the very weight of their pride working against them. We watched as the bridge groaned under the strain, their numbers trickling toward us. Still, we waited, hearts pounding, muscles tensed. When to strike? Not yet, but soon, so very soon. And then it was time. Roughly 2,000 of them had crossed. Knights, infantry, archers. Hemmed in by the river behind and marshes to either side, they had nowhere to run, nowhere to charge. I gave the signal. A cry tore from my throat, half fury, half freedom, and from the ridge, we surged. Horns blared. The earth trembled beneath our feet. Spears lowered. Schiltrons rolled like waves crashing down a hill. We struck with the rage of a people long silenced. The English turned, stunned, their ranks a tangled mess of confusion. There was no room for their cavalry to maneuver, no space to reform. They were trapped, shoulder to shoulder, fighting not as an army, but as panicked men. On the bridge, chaos erupted. Those behind tried to retreat, blocking any hope of escape. Horses reared. Men screamed. Some jumped into the river, only to vanish beneath the weight of their armor. And in the midst of it all, our spears found their mark. They thought they would sweep us aside. Instead, they walked into a storm. One we had waited patiently to unleash. I can still hear the screams, not of fear or fury, of horses thrashing in the mud, of iron clashing on spears, of men trapped between panic and steel. The English had walked into a death trap of their own making. Their knights couldn't charge. Their archers had no field of fire. They were packed so tightly they could barely raise a sword. We pressed hard spear points, driving into their armor, shoving them back toward the river. I remember Hugh Cressingham, so smart, so certain, cut down in the chaos, his fine robes soaked in the blood of men he'd dragged to ruin. On the bridge, it was worse. Soldiers pushed from behind, trying to flee. The planks buckled beneath their weight. Some jumped. Others were thrown heavy mail, dragging them to watery graves. And still we came. Still we struck. It wasn't just a battle, it was justice. For Lanark, for Scone, for every village razed, every child starved. We gave no quarter, and in that storm of rage, we turned the mighty into meat. Across the south bank, the rest of the English army watched in stunned disbelief. They had expected an easy rout, not the annihilation of their vanguard. Panic spread like wildfire. Some commanders begged Surrey to send reinforcements across the bridge. Others pleaded for retreat, but the bridge, God help them, was already failing. Packed with men trying to flee, it groaned under the crush. And still, Wallace and Moray drove us forward. Schiltrons marched like grinding teeth, forcing the trapped knights back into their own men. Horses screamed as they slipped in mud slicked with blood. I saw armored men clawing at their helms, drowning not in water, but in fear. The river ran red. On the bridge, chaos reigned. Timbers snapped. Men tumbled. Some tried to swim, but their pride, forged in steel, dragged them down. Surrey, too slow, too sick, hesitated too long, and by the time he ordered retreat, it was too late. The English line collapsed. What had marched north as a conquering host now scattered like hunted prey, broken and bloodied, vanishing into the hills of a land they'd never understand. When the last English banner fell, silence returned to the field, but it was the silence of the dead. Bodies lay thick along the riverbank, armor twisted, faces frozen in fear. We had won. Stirling Bridge was ours, but it cost us. Among the wounded was Andrew Moray, my brother in arms, my mirror in mind if not in blood. He had fought like the Highland storm he was, but the blow he took, I knew he would not last, and that truth struck deeper than any English blade. Moray was more than a comrade. He was the architect of the dream. Where I burned, he measured. Where I charged, he planned. Without him, the victory tasted of ash. I walked the field that evening, stepping over broken spears and shattered men, and I realized this was not the end. It was only the beginning. The rebellion no longer lived in shadows. It now had a name, a roar, a cause to die for, and a martyr who would not see the dawn. Scotland had bled, and in that blood, something ancient had awakened. With Moray slipping from this world, the weight fell squarely on my shoulders. I did not ask for it, but I accepted it. The people crowned me not with gold, but with trust. I was named Guardian of Scotland, not by nobles in halls, but by farmers, smiths, and mothers whose sons now followed me. I led not with lineage, but with scars, and so we did not rest. We marched southward, across the border, into the very heart of England. Villages burned, garrisons fell. We took what we needed, not from greed, but to feed the fire of resistance. To show Edward Longshanks that we would not cower, we would strike. Our cause no longer begged for survival. It demanded vengeance. The English called me a butcher. The Scots called me deliverance. Wherever we passed, church bells rang. Children whispered my name. And yet I remained what I had always been, a man of the earth, walking beside my men, sleeping on the same stone, sharing the same cold bread. I had no crown, no title, only the roar of a people behind me, and it was enough. They thought we would fade, that the victory at Stirling was a fluke, a breath before the choke. But they were wrong. I did not stop. I could not. As winter crept over the hills, we struck deeper into England, Northumberland, Cumberland. Borderlands that had once watched us burn now watched us rise. We took what we needed, left warnings in fire. Edward's men called it savagery, but to us, it was a language they finally understood. And then, in the frost of 1297, it became real. I was named Guardian of Scotland, not as a king, but as a servant of the people. My seal bore those words by the grace of God, they said, but I knew better. It was by the blood of the fallen. Moray, gone before his time. Farmers and smiths who would never see home again. Their sacrifice was my burden, and I carried it with pride. Stirling Bridge had been a turning point, not just in war, but in belief. No longer did we fight as scattered clans or broken hearts. We had become something unshakable. A voice, a banner, a single cry that echoed across every glen and stone wall. Freedom.